Chapter 11. The Nuns. On the 3rd of April 1874, the Holy See approved the rule of the Salesian Society for an initial period of 10 years. Don Bosco was in Rome at the time, doing what he could do to forward this cause, and on the day in question was eager to know the result of the deliberations of the Congregation of Bishops and Regulars. That evening he called on Monsignor Vitelleschi, the secretary of the congregation. "You could light up the lamps for grand illumination," the latter told him. "Your rules are finally approved, and for a period of 10 years you will have the unconditional right to deliver dismissory letters for your ordinands." In 1884, at the end of the experimental period, the privilege was made permanent. Don Bosco plunged his hand into his pocket and withdrew one of the sweets that he carried for the children who always seemed to be attracted to him wherever he went, and offered it to the prelate. "Here, Monsignor," he claimed, "try one of these. You've surely earned it." That playful remark hid the full extent of his joy. Don Bosco, at any rate, had earned, it might be thought, a little rest from the arduous business of foundation. His congregation was now approved in principle, with houses in Italy and elsewhere, and upwards of 300 members. It was growing rapidly. The time had come, the prudent man would consider, for consolidation. Don Bosco might rest on his hard-earned laurels. In the course of this narrative, we have become sufficiently acquainted with his character to know that such a thing was entirely foreign to his nature, so that it is hardly cause for astonishment that even 2 years before the approbation mentioned above, he was considering the foundation of a congregation of sisters who should do for girls what the Salesians did for boys. Yet there may be grounds for surprise in the fact that thus late in life he turns to the needs of girls and consents to undertake in conjunction with women. For it hardly needs pointing out that throughout his life, so far, he has evinced a distinctive distaste for any collaboration with women. In earlier years, when his mother was alive, and his reliance on her help only serves to emphasize his reluctance to call on other feminine aid, he was often confronted with the need for helping the poor and destitute girls of Turin, whose case was no better than the boys'. His mother frequently expressed to him the wish that something could be done for them. Yet it was necessary to start the Salesian congregation first, to put the work of boys on a firm footing, before anything could be done for the girls. And their idea of founding a new congregation, of women this time, may well have encountered more than a mere reluctance in the mind of Don Bosco. After all he had gone through for the foundation of the Salesians, combined with his own acknowledged repugnance to work with women, the prospect can hardly have been one to fill him with enthusiasm. The establishment of the Salesians, from the first rudimentary beginnings to their final approval, had cost him a great deal. Remark which is revealing, since it came from one who did not usually complain, disclosed as much. "If knowing what I now know," he said, "I had to start afresh all the work that the foundation of the Salesian Society cost, I don't know if I should have the courage to do it." In spite of this, he was even then considering actively the steps necessary to found a second congregation. He had been urged to do so by many whose advice he valued. He had spoken of it to his closest collaborators, Father Caliero, Father Lemoyne, and Father Francesca. In 1871, on the occasion of his 4th visit to Rome, he asked the counsel of the Pope, Pius IX, who encouraged him. "Your proposal must, I think, bring glory to God," he replied, "and save many souls. In my opinion, these future religious women should be the counterpart to the Salesians. They will do for girls what the Salesians are doing for boys, and from the spiritual point of view, they will depend upon you and your successors, as the daughters of St. Vincent de Paul depend upon the Vincentians." With such encouragement, Don Bosco hesitated no longer. It only remained to set about the work of foundation. That was not quite so difficult as it might appear at first sight, for he knew already where he could put his hand on the nucleus of the future congregation. Not much more than a year after his interview with the Pope, the Congregation of Daughters of Mary Help of Christians was in being. The comparative ease with which he was able to set on foot that which is perhaps the second most important undertaking of his life, he owed in the first place to a chance encounter in a train some 10 years previously. He was on his way back from Acqui to Turin by way of Alexandria when, in the third-class compartment in which he was travelling, he met Don Pestarino, the parish priest of Mornese, a little Piedmontese village in the heart of Monferrato. The two priests talked of their work, and Don Pestarino no doubt told Don Bosco of the association of girls he had formed for various charitable activities in his parish. From this association, a branch had broken away in 1861. Its members were leading our religious life and looking after the needy girls of the parish. Its leading spirit was Mary Mazzarello. She came of the same hard-working, sturdy peasant stock as Don Bosco, though the circumstances that led her to adopt religious life, the opportunities and determining elements of her vocation, differed from his very considerably. She was born in 1837 and was formed in very much the same rugged alpine mould as Margaret Bosco. When she was 6, her parents moved to a new house some way out of Mornese, but, despite the long and arduous walk, as a girl, Mary Mazzo would often make her way of a morning to Mass in the parish church. She was one of the first to join the Marian sodality inaugurated by the parish priest, and her popularity in the village encouraged others to join. When her father's health gave way, Mary did her best to take his place in the fields, and worked so hard that he was obliged to restrain her. "Gently," he would warn her, "gently, Mary. If you work so hard, I shall not be able to find the labourers, because they will be ashamed to do less than a girl." All accounts show her at the time, a girl in her teens, as cheerful and gentle, avoiding showiness in dress, but neat in her appearance, and evincing that simplicity which is always attractive. In 1860, her charity was put to the test when an epidemic of typhoid broke out in the village. Mary went to nurse her relations, and indeed what she could to help others who had no one to care for them, thus earning for herself the nickname of the Sister of Charity. Finally, she herself caught the disease, and for some time there was little hope of her recovery. She rounded the corner eventually, however, and after a long convalescence was on her feet once more, but it was obvious that never again would she be able to work in the fields and about the farm, doing all the arduous tasks that are the usual lot of peasant woman. She determined to earn her living by dressmaking, and with a friend, Petronilla, took lessons and set up a small business near the church. Soon they were taking in local girls as apprentices, and so began what in its elements was something not very unlike what Don Bosco had done for the boys of Turin. Mary Mazzarello and her companions prayed and worked and did what they could for the girls of the parish, providing them with a recreation centre and superintending their games, trying not unsuccessfully to imbue them with the principles of a Christian life. It was on Friday, the 8th of October, 1864, when Mary Mazzarello first met Don Bosco, who had come to Mornese with some of his boys on one of the holiday excursions that every autumn from 1855 onwards he organized for those in his care. It was an encounter that was to influence the rest of her life, for from that very first meeting, without having spoken to him, she understood that between them a firm link would be forged. An identity of purpose, agreement as to the methods were all contributory factors, no doubt, but what she experienced on that October evening was undoubtedly the attraction of sanctity. Following his usual custom, Don Bosco, for the next few days, spent his time confessing the village, and every evening managed to fill the parish church for a popular instruction of the kind that of which he was a past master. Mary Mazzarello did not miss one, and in addition managed to slip in unnoticed for the prayers and short talk that Don Bosco held every evening for his boys. Her cousin, however, perceived what she was doing and reproached her for her behaviour. Mary Mazzarello's reply completely reveals her sentiments. "But he's a saint, I tell you," she protested. "I can feel he is." So began a collaboration that was to last 20 years. To Don Bosco, Mary Mazzarello was to occupy the place that St. Louis de Marillac held for St. Vincent de Paul and St. Jean de Chantal for St. Francis de Sales. The young peasant of Mornese was to lend her aid to him, who had been the peasant boy of Becky, in work that urgently needed doing and that no one was tackling at all seriously. Don Bosco was then 49. Mary Mazzarello was 27. At the time of his first meeting, of course, Don Bosco had by no means decided on the foundations of a feminine counterpart to the Salesians. Yet surely the project was in his mind. Many years beforehand, as he took his first hesitant steps towards a foundation, when he was driven from pillar to post in Turin, he had experienced one of those dreams that told him what he must do in the future. In his dream, he was making his way along the Via Cotolengo. On the right stood Pinardi's house, the future cradle of the congregation. On his left was the Casa Moretta, near which was one day to rise the mother house of the sisters. Our Lady showed him Pinardi's house, which he was to obtain and transform, murmuring as she did so, "Hic inde gloria mea." Perhaps at the time he did not understand that from both one day were to come great works that should spread abroad, works of charity towards the young, under the protection of the Mother of God. In another dream, he was arguing with the Marchesa di Barolo, who seemed to be trying to confine his work to boys. "You look after them and leave the girls to me," she said. "Excuse me, Marchesa," replied Don Bosco. "Our Lord came on earth to save both girls and boys. I, too, must work in order that his blood may be avail for both." Another dream, even clearer, set him on this occasion in one of the largest squares in Turin, the Piazza Vittorio. A crowd of girls were playing noisily in the square, but directly Don Bosco appeared, all ran towards him, imploring him to care for them as he did for boys. "But that's not my vocation," he protested. "I've work enough with all my boys." Whereupon a group of older girls came forward. "Are we always to remain abandoned by all?" they inquired. This dream reflected to some extent what was happening in real life. Frequently, Don Bosco encountered little girls around the entrance to his oratory. A contemporary letter from Marchesa Fossati to her mother, the Contessa Rodolphe de Maestra, bears witness to this. "I wonder if you'd heard," she writes, "that Don Bosco is going to see about a foundation for women. It seems that the little girls in his neighborhood often would gather round him and cry, 'Take care of us like you do the boys. No one ever thinks of us.'" Don Bosco kept in touch with a little community of women at Mornese, which had increased to 15. Finally, after deliberations of the Salesian chapter, it was decided in June 1871 to bring into being the second branch of Don Bosco's congregation, and after a delay owing to his illness, an election was held for the superior. By this time, the Mornese community had again increased to 27 members. On the first ballot at the election held on the 19th of January 1872, Mary Mazzarello was chosen by 21 votes. On the following 5th of August, the Bishop of Acqui clothed them in the religious habit, and that same day Don Bosco gave them their name. "You will be called," he informed them, "the Daughters of Mary, Help of Christians." Don Pastorino had asked Don Bosco to start a boys' school in his parish, and buildings had been made ready. The bishop, however, considered the project inopportune, and it was therefore decided to make over the new building to the nuns. Here was a cause of misunderstanding and difficulty of the sort that not rarely tries religious foundations in their initial stages. The villagers were indignant that they were not to have a boys' school, and that the building had been given to nuns, women whom they hardly took seriously. After all, weren't they drawn from their own ranks? The Daughters of Mary, Help of Christians had much to put up with. They were mocked at, cold-shouldered even by their own relatives. Don Bosco, who had experienced his full share of such treatment, encouraged them to remain cheerful. A little persecution of the sort, he told them, never did anyone any harm, and could be the cause of much good. Thus, in the adversity, the community thrived, outgrew its accommodation, transferred to a mother house in a disused Capuchin friary in Nizza Monferrato, and in 1878 sent 6 sisters to the missions to the Indians of the Argentine. By 1881, there were 13 other convents in Italy and France. The sisters' principal work was to do for the girls what the Salesians were doing for boys. Don Bosco was the inspiration of the work, and it was his methods that were followed. Mary Mazzarello reflected his spirit among her subjects. There was a simplicity and a naturalness about them, combined with gentleness and an approach to problems that was evidence of their country origin and the understanding of the work entrusted to them. The life of Mary Mazzarello would have to point out her humility, and in consequence her obedience. Both qualities were needed for this peasant girl to guide the destinies of the nascent congregation, and she did so with a sureness of touch and directness of teaching that she owed to her peasant upbringing and her early years on her father's farm. This absence of complication in things spiritual principally, but also in the ordinary matters of everyday life, is a characteristic that she shared with Don Bosco, just as she came from environment and stock that resembled his own. This peasant woman, declared Pius XI, possessed only a rudimentary education, but at once gave evidence of a valuable talent, the gift of government. The founder, Don Bosco, with deep psychological insight, recognized this great asset at the very beginning and utilized it to the full. She died in 1881 at the age of only 44, and her body rests now in the Church of Our Lady Help of Christians beside that of Don Bosco. In 1938, at her beatification, she was canonized in 1951, a requillary containing one of her vertebrae was presented to the Pope. "That is the vertebra of a strong woman," remarked Pius XI, and of her hands, faithfully depicted in the portrait, he said, "These hands are those of St. John Bosco, the hands of a hard worker."